has a definition of exactly what is and what isn't metagaming. It's always more helpful, especially for new players, to explain why a specific behavior at the table is disruptive.
Metagaming is one of my favorite topics to talk about in terms of, well, I guess really anything, because metagaming isn't something that is specific to tabletop RPGs, to D&D, although it does definitely get talked about in more of a negative light there. But we use metagaming all the time, but we only refer to it as that in usually, instances like what Eldritch Podblast, which if you're not following them, go and do so. They're great. Described. Most people probably encounter it in a way where a player is using knowledge they have that the character doesn't have, as if the character has knowledge, right? The classic example that I always give is you have a paladin, you have a rogue in the party, and they're playing, the iconic, super lawful religious paladin and chaotic, stupid rogue, and the rogue goes out in the middle of the night to steal something, and the first thing in the morning, the paladin's like, "What'd you go and steal, rogue?" when you were asleep the whole time, right? Metagaming, terrible. But we do metagaming all the time. All metagaming means is that you're using meta knowledge from outside of the game, within the game. Have you ever thought to yourself, I want to play a really powerful character. I want to play a character that can, do a lot of damage, right? I know wizard. I know that fireball's the one of the best spells there is. Or if I play a half elven paladin, I can take elven accuracy, and then when I have advantage, I get to roll 3 times. And if I take a level into Hexblade, if you're playing 2014 D&D, then I have a chance to crit on a 19 and 20. That's meta knowledge. You as the player are using knowledge outside of the game to make better choices in the game, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's fine. Metagaming can be fine. Obviously, that's also a little bit different because that's not character, or that's not knowledge your character is using. But here's one of my favorite examples to share of when I encouraged a player to use meta knowledge, when I encouraged a player to metagame. We were playing Waterdeep Dragon Heist. So the players had just gotten their tavern, Trollkeep Tavern, I think it is. And they were attacked in the middle of the night, and a few of them were actually already downstairs. They were, having beers in their tavern or whatever. So there were some people downstairs, and I think it was just the wizard was upstairs in their bedroom, and assassins snuck in the middle of the night, attacked everybody all at once. Obviously, the wizard upstairs all by themselves is kind of a problem. And they ended up not doing so well, and they dropped to 0 HP while out on a balcony, and I had them roll a dice to see if they fell off the balcony or not. They did. So hitting the ground was already a death saving throw because they were 0 HP before they hit the ground. And even if the players knew what was happening, the time it would take for them to get out there would be more than 2 rounds. Now, maybe the wizard would roll well on the death saving throws. She did not. But one of the players, when it got to their turn, was like, I really want to go and check on Marie, but my character would have no reason to, right? There's no reason for me to know that she's not doing well. And someone could argue that, well, they're the wizard. They would be, that they're not hardy enough, that if an assassin's going after them, especially if they were sleeping, that they're going to need help, and you could go and check on them. But the player goes, yeah, but if she wasn't down, I wouldn't think to do that. And that's a fair assessment. However, I erred on the side of caution in the first one. She's a wizard. You know that wizards are pretty frail, usually. As powerful as they can be pretty frail. And yet, if she was asleep as well, she's a goner. So if you want to use your turn to go and check on her, you can do that. I think that's perfectly fine. And I think that there's a correct way to use meta knowledge that you as a player know that your character doesn't know. And that is finding a way to connect those two things, right? The character can act upon the knowledge. This is at least how I run the table. Your character can act upon knowledge that you know if you can explain to me either how or why they're doing so. Now, in the example later in the video with Eldritch Podblast, they mentioned something like if a veteran player, let's say you're playing in a new campaign and you're a newbie adventurer, but you're a veteran player and you know that trolls are weak to fire, right? So as soon as the battle starts, you tell everybody, use fire, right? Normally I would have people roll like a nature or a history, something to see if maybe you've picked up that knowledge along the way, right? If not, if you just right out the gate, you're like, I know it's fire, it's troll stuff, and there's nothing in your background to suggest that you would know that, yeah, that's probably bad metagaming. But otherwise, you could ask. Like, always ask your DM, what might I know about this thing? Or I use metagaming like this a lot, and I encourage more people to do this. I use metagaming in relation to roleplay, in relation to what you as the character know, what you as the player know, in order to decide how your character should approach something. And here's another really good example from my time. In one campaign that I had, we had a guy who was playing a wild magic sorcerer who was very kind of chaotic. He liked to do things randomly. He'd flip a coin to make decisions, and people weren't into that. Players weren't into that. They weren't very cool about that, especially because the coin flipping just sometimes led to AOE stuff that was hitting them as well. Like, it got the enemies, and the enemies were definitely worse off than the party was, but people got pretty fed up with that pretty quickly and let the player know in character, and they weren't very kind about it. Similarly, in a campaign that I'm running right now, we have a warlock turned sorcerer, but as a warlock, there were some homebrew things. They had some magic, some wild magic stuff, and they too often would act in ways that were a bit more selfish and sometimes harmed the other players or put the other players in harm, even if it turned out well. When they finally confronted the warlock, they didn't do so in an accusatory way. They didn't, do so in like a you need to change or you're out of here type way. Instead, they sat her down and tried to talk to her and tried to understand why she was doing the selfish things that she was doing. And the reason they did that is because the players knew that this warlock had a manipulative, toxic patron that was the one who ultimately was influencing the ways that she was making her decisions because she didn't feel worthwhile and she felt she needed his approval. And so the players sat them down as like, oh, we're here for you. We're your friends. You can talk to us. We can help you. There's a better way to be. The players used meta knowledge of what they knew of the character that the other characters didn't do in order to create a better story moment of character growth for the warlock. So yes, metagaming a lot of times can be used very poorly, but there's also a way to metagame well.